circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome. This is Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Back for Series 2. I want to give a quick shout out and a thank you to Emma Webb, who kept my seat warm whilst I was on holiday. She did an excellent job. Thank you, Emma. Now today we will be discussing womb transplants are undoubtedly a major scientific advance, but are there ethical concerns? Also, should workplace discrimination against Christians be investigated by Parliament? And we'll hear about the devastating humanitarian crisis unfolding in Artsakh, an enclave within Azerbaijan. And in the duel, my panellists will be discussing a Times survey which says Church of England priests think Britain is no longer a Christian country. What do you think? Connor Tomlinson.
I think, as the Venerable Fulton Sheen once said, the church which weds itself to this age will widow itself in the next. If the church wants to revitalise its congregation, then it should stop preaching progressivism and start preaching the gospel.
More Fulton Sheen quotes, please. And Dennis McShane.
Well, the gospel is the most progressive document ever written. It's full of equality, loving your neighbour, being generous, showing lots of charity and mercy, which isn't much on the right-wing agenda. Look, Church of England... I was driving around the Midlands of the North yesterday.
Dennis, we'll get to the...
We'll get to
the fuller statement later. Thank you. But before all that, there's the news with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The condition of some public buildings, including hospitals, is being described as jaw-dropping as concerns grow over their risk of collapse. The chair of the Commons Public Accounts Committee is warning the issue of aerated concrete in schools is just the tip of the iceberg. Writing in The Times, Dame Meg Hillier says eye-watering sums of money are being spent on mitigating the risks. Labour's demanding an urgent audit, while the Liberal Democrats have labelled it a national emergency which warrants an immediate Cobra meeting. There's been a huge surge in small boat crossings the Channel. GB News can reveal around 600 asylum seekers made it to UK waters today. The number of migrants intercepted so far this year now stands at more than 20,000. The RMT union says it's hopeful fresh talks next week can bring an end to their long-running dispute over pay and conditions. Up to 20,000 members at 14 operators have walked out this weekend, causing severe disruption. Meanwhile, members of the train drivers' union ASLEF, who were on the picket lines yesterday, have refused to work overtime today. RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch told GB News a fresh proposal is key to resolving the dispute.
We go into those talks with an attitude and a disposition to try and get an agreement, but there are some serious issues, as most people know now. We don't want to be on strike. We'd much rather be earning a living and running the service for the people who need to use it. So hopefully, if we can get a different mindset next week, we can get some progress.
Policing should not be used as a political football, a warning for the Home Secretary after she accused officers of partisanship on controversial issues. The Police Federation of England and Wales says the government want officers to be more involved while simultaneously acting like robots. Suella Braverman has commissioned a review into activism and impartiality in the force, which Labour says demonstrates her political obsession with the issue. The Lib Dems have accused her of using the police as a weapon in her culture war. Bricks have been salvaged from the Wonky pub that's at the centre of an arson investigation in Himley in the West Midlands. Organisers of the Save the Crooked House project, which was destroyed by fire last month, held a ceremony. They have stored the bricks in locked containers and hope the pub can be rebuilt. 2 men have been released on conditional bail after being arrested on suspicion of arson with intent to endanger life. And the King and Queen have attended the Braemar Gathering Highland Games in Aberdeenshire. The event was held a short distance from the Royals' summer retreat at Balmoral. Charles wore a kilt in the newly created King Charles III tartan, which was created to mark the coronation. This is GB News. I'll be back with more in just under an hour's time. Now it's over to Calvin.
A vast majority of Church of England priests believe Britain can no longer be described as a Christian country, says a New Times survey. Well, what are they doing about it? Pontificating over whether we should call God our Father in the Lord's Prayer, promoting transgender persons to the position of archdeacon, pinning pride flags on the altar, hosting drag queens in the sanctuary, everything but evangelising the nation. As Christians, we're called to disciple the nations. That is one of the primary vocations of deacons, priests and bishops. Instead, it seems the Church of England is obsessed with adapting to the social norms of the secular world around it. Why disciple the nation when you can let the nation disciple you? A majority of those surveyed said they believed the Church should change its teaching on gay marriage in the Church, sex outside of marriage, and women's roles in the Church. The Church does not have the authority to change its teaching on these issues. They're doctrinal. Either the Church of England professes to be Christian, or it does not. Either she adheres to the creeds, or she leaves the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. There is no update feature in the faith. There is no capability for the Church to get with the times. These priests had better repent, return to their Bible, for their good and the good of the souls of the nation. The Times survey is not representative, though. The polling tactics that they used were not up to scratch. I know many good priests within the Church of England who are livid at the results. But the point stands, why are there so many heretical priests among their ranks? Sex before marriage is fornication. Sex outside of marriage is adultery. Homosexual sex is sodomy. These are sins. It's not a kindness to affirm sinful lifestyles, however contemporary it may be. Priests are called to be loving in truthfulness, and their duty is the cure of souls. That means leading souls to Christ to be saved. By encouraging extramarital sex and homosexual acts, these modern priests are knowingly leading souls towards hell. Eternal damnation awaits any so-called teacher of the faith who preaches acceptance of what God has called abominable. It becomes clearer by the week with every false pronouncement that the Church of England is in a managed decline, and that the current hierarchy are not interested in saving it or even saving souls, but in leaving behind a perfectly embalmed liberal corpse. If there is a future for Christianity in England, it will come from a united front from the small O Orthodox faithful. The old dividing lines of evangelical and Catholic will fall away as Orthodox Christians across denominations unite around defence of the Christian faith as it comes under assault from the so-called liberal progressives, whose only God is social acceptance and whose only doctrine is virtue signalling. England always has been and always will be a Christian country. That does not mean there will always be a Church of England. So those are my thoughts on this thought-provoking and concerning Times survey, but what will my brilliant duelists make of it? It's time for this week's duel. My sidekick this week is writer and broadcaster Connor Tomlinson, and this week's nemesis is former Labour MP Dennis McShane. I'm plenty to discuss in this one, but I think I'm going to start with Dennis. My thoughts on the C of E are that it's plummeting from one scandal to the next, but it seems that in order to protect Christianity in this country, it's the faithful masses that need to come together, Dennis.
Yes, you talked about the Church of England representing the Universal Holy and Apostolic Church. Actually, the Church of England left the Universal Holy and Apostolic Church in heresy 500 years ago. As a Catholic, I can take you through the history.
Okay.
I can take you through the history. Look, a poll of Church of England clerics, excuse me, actually, I'm quite impressed on Sundays, just driving around London, at the number of church congregations that are vibrant, lively, going out. There's a lot of external church activity now, running pilgrimages here inside the UK and to other sites. So I'm not particularly worried. I think Christianity, faith of all sorts, plays an important role in British public life, British life. Just because, a few wet and woolly vicars think it's all going to hell in a handcart, is that the appropriate metaphor? I'm not quite sure. I think long after I'm dead, there'll still be people going to church, and the churches in different forms will still be active.
OK, that's hopeful and positive. I do want to address your point that England did not leave the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. England left communion with Rome. England is still a Christian country, and Anglicanism is not a new religion. It is still the Christian faith. It is the English expression of the Catholic faith, if anything. Connor, let's not debate that one. England is no longer a Christian country, according to the priests within the Church of England.
Yeah, it wouldn't shock me. It seems the pronouncement that Nietzsche, who I don't think we're big fans of, made years ago, that without God, with civilization deracinated after his cultural death, that the great cathedrals of Europe will become mausoleums and sepulchres to a good idea, to a dead ideal, is rapidly becoming true. Because as much as Dennis has anecdotal experience saying that the congregations are still thriving in central London, there are many churches that aren't seeing as many people coming to not just Sunday Mass, but Mass throughout the week. There are fewer people. Fortunately, though, among my generation, I think there's a minor resurgence, and that's just because of a cultural retaliation against the nihilism and the hedonism that the generations before us have passed on to us. And we're going, well, we'd prefer a bit more structure and direction, and actually it's a bit miserable just engaging in hookup culture in universities, for example. But I don't think the church itself, and this goes for the Catholic Church as well, particularly its recent World Youth Day, where they housed the communion wafers in Tupperware boxes, things like that show they don't have a sense of the sacred. They're not going to attract people to their congregations if they're flying pride flags, which has the doctrine of God got it wrong. I think abide by the gospel itself and not just whatever progressive zeitgeist is inhabiting your brain at the time.
Yeah, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but you've mentioned the host in the tabernacle, in the Tupperware instead of the tabernacle. And I think this is part of a wider problem, isn't it? That there is a lack of reverence. Now, if you truly believe that God is present in that place, you would be the most reverential you possibly could towards that place and towards that host.
It's part of the culture of arrogance that we're seeing, in that we can't have anything that is sacred and obscured. because obscurity reminds us that we are not the masters of the world. Instead, because we've de-godded culture, we suddenly have this Promethean ambition to remake the environment and even turning it inwards into ourselves with the gospel of trans identity. So those are incompatible perspectives to the church, and to return to the sacred, a little bit of proximate distance to the highest ideal, it's very healthy for a very egocentric culture.
Do you go to the Latin Mass?
No, there's not one around me. But I have also, there's, even though our design in the church is a bit VAT2, my priest watches this show, so I couldn't give that service up.
Good man. I do think the nervous order is part of the problem, not the problem, but a symptom of the wider problem, and that lack of reverence that we talked about and lack of sacred. Dennis.
Introiva ad altari Dei. That is how the Mass started when I was an altar boy, and all those years spent on my knees and now giving my knees quite a bit of jip. Now, we can continue in Latin if you find it helpful. You're a multicultural man, Calvin, and Connor's very educated. But under Tupperware, for heaven's sake, nearly 2 million young people came to hear the Pope's message. And, of course, you can't distribute the host in the classic way. Well, you still be distributing now in Portugal. And that's just a small example of where I think your thesis breaks down, that, as I say, these, I don't know when they were started, about 20 years ago, these Catholic World Youth Days are attracting enormous crowds. So I think there's a lot out there for discussion. I mean, King Charles told us he had to be the king of all the faiths.
Which is wrong, isn't it?
I don't quite know what that meant. Well, he did actually, in the coronation oath, said he was to uphold the supremacy of the Protestant religion, not the Christian religion, just one sect, or one church. And all over Ireland, people fell off their bars, drank their Guinness and burst out laughing. More English Anglican supremacy. So I'm just gently trying to steer it away a little bit from one self-selecting survey. I mean, right now, they used to say the Anglican Church is the Tory party at prayer. The Labour Party has become very, very conservative in recent years, so it's probably now the Labour Party at prayer. And they will feel at home with a very cautious, respectful, conservative, don't rock the boat, avoid anything very dramatic Labour leadership at the moment.
The problem I have with the actual survey question is that they sent out 5,000 emails, 1,200 were answered. So that suggests straight away that actual Orthodox priests were busy in their parishes doing priestly ministry, and the keyboard warriors were the ones that were quick to respond with the woke suggestions. But even if that is the case, a majority of the 1,200 that did reply wanted to promote heresy. How do we have that many heretical priests within our state church?
Well, I'm not an expert on Anglican, the Articles of Faith. Karl Marx said that the Anglican Church would rather give up 38 of its 39 articles than 1/39 of its wealth and income. And so that just was a cynical statement from over 100 years ago. On these polls, can I tell you a story? It's slightly offbeat, but it's relevant. When I was working in the Foreign Office with Robin Cook, he's a brand new minister, and his marriage bust up, OK? And the son splashed, the ugliest kind of garden gnome picture of Robin Cook imaginable and said, would you sleep with this man? Answer yes or no. And the order went out throughout the Foreign Office, everybody get off whatever you're doing, saving the world, invading a country, start pressing the yes button. So I would have to say 1,200 buttons punched on a poll. It's not that serious.
OK. Connor, do you think the poll is part of the problem? Is this part of the progressives using it to promote their heretical ways and say, look, clearly there's an appetite here for changing the church's views on same-sex marriage and on sex outside of marriage and on women's ordinations and such issues?
We can often see the polls are used to manufacture consent. Also, the church, to the credit of still some ministers in the upper echelons, have said, yeah, the government have been pressuring us to officially recognise this, even though some of us still don't want to. So there are multiple factors influencing this. But I'm glad that Dennis actually raised Karl Marx, because in the opening, when Dennis said that actually the gospel is really progressive, no, lots of modern progressive doctrines are a form of neo-Marxism, yet they came from the fertile soil of hands-off liberalism, where it's just, oh, you can do whatever you want, as long as you're not harming anyone, except lots of the time you're harming yourself. But that took root in that soil, and Marxism itself was set up in diametric opposition to Christianity. Marx said he wanted to revolve around himself as his own true son in a very satanic fashion. He wrote satanic poetry. He inverted the parable of the talents to get his maxim from each according to his ability to each according to his own need. Friedrich Engels even had to discourage him from calling the Communist Manifesto the catechism of communism. So he directly hated Christianity as the bulwark against materialistic managerialism. And so fundamentally, progressivism, born of Marxism, incompatible with Christianity, and any church that preaches it is preaching the gospel of the Antichrist.
Well, the Catholic Church used to say that the communism is antithetical to the faith, and it was impossible to be a communist and a Christian. And now you have a communist pope, so you've gone a long way. But I do like what you said about the argument that people often use that, oh, he's not harming anyone. That whole argument is, it doesn't work because you're harming your soul, you're harming yourself, even if you're not harming anyone else around you.
And if you universalise that perspective, if everyone is just an atomised individual consumer with no consideration for his fellow countrymen, guess what? Nobody noticed while your civilization is collapsing around you.
That's why I joined a trade union. I didn't want to be an atomised individual. I wanted to work with others. But it's the American Constitution which says, Article 1, Article 2, there shall be no established religion. And it was the French Revolution that also got rid of all roles for the churches, and the churches in France never flourished more. So perhaps this will be a wake-up.
That's not what I'm seeing at the moment, though, Dennis.
What?
That's not what I'm seeing at the moment in France.
Oh, yes. In France, there are lots of different faiths.
One's often burning the other one's churches down.
Well, yes, there's a lot of ugly religiosity about, stirred up by people who perhaps should think through a little bit before they open their mouths. But in France, my rough experience, I go to France quite a lot, I speak the language well, I lived there a long time, that there'll be more people going to Mass and churches on a Sunday than there are in England.
Well, that's good news. Let's end on some Latin. In nomine Patri et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Plenty more to come on my Common Sense Crusade next week. The ability to carry out womb transplants is a huge scientific advantage, but are the ethical issues beyond being ignored? Can I remember how to do this? I'll try to answer that question with the help of a distinguished medical expert.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to. by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. This is the dawn of a new age, said the chair of the British Fertility Society following the announcement of the first ever womb transplant in the UK. A woman with 2 children of her own already has helped her sister, who was born without a uterus, and the sister is now preparing to have her own embryos implanted. An incredible scientific accomplishment, and wonderful to hear both sisters are doing well, but are there ethical questions which perhaps need to be raised here? The removal of a woman's womb, or hysterectomy, is a significant operation and carries risks to the person involved. Here to discuss this important issue, I'm joined by Dr. Trevor Stammers, a university lecturer in medical ethics, who was a GP for over 30 years. Dr. Trevor, thank you for joining us. If you could start out with giving us what's your take on the risk of this operation, first and foremost.
Well, I think the significant point from an ethical point of view, and it's connected with risk, is that clearly there's risk with any organ transplant to the donor and to the recipient. But usually organ transplants are life-saving operations. So this, of course, is different in as much as the intention of it, and hopefully it will, give life to a new baby because of this transplant. But it isn't life-saving. And so the risks need to be put first of all, I think, in that context. And the risk in this situation with a transplant is greater than with a hysterectomy. And the reason for that is that hysterectomies are normally done for disease, cancer, endometriosis, and so on. And the sole object of the operation is to remove the womb. In a transplant, you need to remove vasculature, blood vessels, so as to make good connections when you've transplanted it. And so that takes more time, and there is therefore more risk than there would be with a hysterectomy. The risk of death in that is small, of the order of 1 in 1,000, depending on the method used. So this would be a little bit higher. But there are other risks as well, bleeding, infection that occur with any operation, of course. So it's not risk-free for sure.
Well, since there seems to be a higher risk in this operation, and it's not a life-saving operation, it's elective, do you think there'll be medical professionals that opt out of even doing this procedure?
I think there will always be surgeons willing to do it. I'm more concerned about the area of consent and the information that is given to patients. I mean, it's interesting that you quoted somebody as saying this is the dawn of a new age. In fact, the first one of these womb transplants was done in April 2000 in Saudi Arabia. So the new age is actually 24 years on, isn't it? So it has been around for a while. And folks have had severe complications. That woman in Saudi, in fact, had to have the womb removed after 99 days because there was a massive clot, which is thrombosis, which is another risk. So I think that accurate information needs to be given about the risk, and then for the patient to make the choice. But the other thing is that, of course, having a successful transplant is a first stage of a dual stage necessity in order to have children. You've still then, once the transplant's been hopefully not rejected or had any major complications, you've then got to deliver a baby with it. And I noticed some clinics in the States are massaging the figures and saying that they're having success rates of sort of near 80%. And that's because they're only counting in the figures the successful transplants, and about a third of them fail. And obviously, if you exclude those, you're going to boost your figures. So the chances of pregnancy are about 50%. I think there've been just over 100 done worldwide and about 50 babies born. And that's another thing that needs to be made very clear. And that's only right because obviously the desire to have a child, to be considering a child of your own, to be considering this operation is a very, very strong desire, but it does need to be put in the context of the risks and accurate information given.
Well, thank you for giving us that medical information. That was Dr. Trevor Stammers, of a university lecturer in medical ethics. I do want to bring my panel into this because I want to talk about the moral implications here. Connor, it seems to me that we're playing God, and this is a slippery slope here. It looks like this could potentially be used, for example, for trans births, for example.
My concern is, where are you sourcing the wombs from and who are you giving them to? So there is the plan, the article that you forwarded on to us, there is the plan that the 10 more of these that are going to be practiced, that have already been lined up in the UK, are going to source them from brain-dead women. There was also a proposal a little while ago in a bioethics journal that women who are in comas could be used to gestate babies as surrogates. Yes, the global surrogacy trade is also another major thing. That combines with the global organ trade. We obviously know that in the Uyghur concentration camps in China, they source organs for wealthy Saudi Arabians. My concern would be there would be a global organ black market, as well as a global surrogacy market, because there was a recent human trafficking ring busted in Crete for shipping babies over, and Ukraine, which currently sources about 25% of the global surrogacy market. They are still running their surrogacy clinics despite the war going on. And the head of the Biotexcom company there said, one, we need to target women in the former Eastern Soviet bloc because there's no one else in the world financially desperate enough. And two, what we're doing this for is to create reproductive technologies to gestate it outside the womb, to make babies essentially a product for either transgender people, and they might even source it from some of those girls who have been sterilised early on in their youth because of transgender ideology. That might also create another market for it. So it's just so many ethical complications going on here.
I mean, Dennis, I want to get your take on this. Is this modern-day Dr. Frankenstein? It sounds like there's a whole criminal empire that could be built on top of this. But even without that, without the human trafficking of the surrogacy, this is us playing God, isn't it?
God, I'm not sure about. I want to just have a modest, quiet word for the sister who donated her womb. You use that word donated as if she was just handing over a cup of tea to her sister, but it's a huge intervention inside her body, and I think it's a remarkable gift. And Dr. Stammers made very, very good points. He said that transplants were used to save life, but also to give life. Ensure that people have a better quality of life. My father died from a war wound that led on then to nephritis. That's when your kidneys collapse. Just before transplants and dialysis became the norm. Yeah. I would hope I'd have the courage if one of my children or brothers really needed it to donate one of my kidneys. Maybe at my age, there's not much point. And what the punishment I've inflicted on my poor kidneys with drinking too much. But no, I mean, every similar advance has been criticised and throwing up Frankenstein, you know, the Frankenstein references, ethical questions. I'm sure, I completely agree about the criminality of the organ trade. I know an awful lot about that from the Balkans. But those are for the police to handle, for ethical commissions to handle. I don't think you can simply turn off that particular tap.
OK. My concern is that children are a blessing and a gift, not necessarily a right. But I wish I could talk about this all day, but plenty more to come on this show on this evening. My Common Sense Crusade. Next up, we'll have a discussion on workplace discrimination against Christians, and should this be part of a remit of a parliamentary inquiry. But first, here's the weather.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Jonathan Vaughtry, here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Hope you've managed to enjoy Saturday. It will be ending on a relatively fine note for many of us. Some late sunny spells to be had and generally a lot of dry, clear weather into the night as well. We'll allow for some mist and fog patches to develop into the early hours of Sunday morning, though, most extensively for central eastern areas of England. Further towards the north, we've got a band of rain pushing into northern Scotland. Could be heavy at times for the Isle of Lewis and the Northern Isles, but most of us will see our temperatures holding up around 13-14 degrees Celsius as we start off Sunday morning. So a fairly mild start. Will take a little bit of time for that mist and fog to clear, but eventually it will clear its way off, and many of us will see a good amount of sunshine throughout the day, feeling really pleasantly warm in that highs of 26 degrees Celsius possible across southeastern areas of England. Further to the north, though, that rain will be lingering across the Highlands up into the Northern Isles, so being a much fresher here, and gales around coastal areas for a time as well. High pressure will be hanging on into the start of the new working week, still though with that lingering front across the far north, and also the isobars squeezing together across the west country. So Monday, generally a bit of a breezier day for parts of Devon, Cornwall, definitely some coastal gusts, but elsewhere winds will be relatively light inland, and there'll be a decent amount of sunshine throughout much of the day, again once that early mist and fog does clear its way off. We hold on to some of that sunshine throughout the rest of the week, perhaps a little bit more cloud developing more towards Thursday, but that's also where our temperatures will be climbing the highest. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Are Christians mistreated in the workplace because of their beliefs? That's the concern of religious groups who have asked a parliamentary inquiry to investigate. The group wants Labour's Harriet Harman, chair of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Human Rights, to make sure religious freedom forms a part of their ongoing inquiry. The news comes amidst concern that discrimination against Christians and other religious groups in the workplace is commonplace. Here to tell me more, I'm delighted to welcome James Somerville-Meikle, Deputy Director of the Catholic Union. James, thank you for coming on again. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. What is your take on the call for this parliamentary inquiry?
Well, as you mentioned, there's this inquiry in Parliament being run by the Joint Committee on Human Rights. That's a cross-party group of MPs and peers, one of only a small number of committees that's cross both houses of Parliament. And they're looking into human rights at work, which is great. So far, the discussions have been on trade union legislation, pay and conditions, all the other kind of workplace rights that you would think about. And those are things that the Catholic Church welcomes a discussion on. The Church has got a proud history when it comes to workers' rights and standing up for fairness and for justice. But we also want to see some more basic, some more fundamental human rights included as part of this inquiry, including freedom of religion, because we know that it's becoming harder for Catholics to be true to their faith at work. A survey that we carried out earlier this year found that 1 in 3 people, 33%, had been disadvantaged in some way at work because of their faith. And this isn't something unique to Catholics. We see it with other Christians as well, other people of faith. So we've put our name to this joint letter, ourselves at the Catholic Union, along with the Christian Institutes and the Evangelical Alliance, to make sure that this most fundamental of human rights, freedom of religion, is not overlooked as part of this inquiry, and indeed is integral to the recommendations and report to government later this year.
Well, I'm glad you're working with the Christian Institute, very good people, and the Evangelical Alliance, but this goes back to what I said in the start of the show, in that I think actually the intolerance towards Christianity that we're seeing in the country will form an alliance amongst small O Orthodox Christians. The faithful masses will come together. So this strength and unity there. But James, would you say it's a fair assessment that other forms of discrimination, such as age, sex, race, for example, are taken more seriously than discrimination due to religious beliefs?
Well, that's certainly something that we found in our survey earlier this year. And as I mentioned in my first remarks, we found that 1 in 3 people had been disadvantaged because of their faith. Now, if you substitute that for any other protected characteristic, disability, age, sexuality, that would be headline news, and we on the mainstream media, and we wouldn't tolerate it. And I suppose, in a way, all that we're calling for is for all of those human rights to be properly upheld across the board. So we're not calling on Parliament or the government to reinvent the wheel here. There is extensive legislation in place recognising and upholding freedom of religion or belief. We want to see that upheld and enforced in the way that other rights are.
And do we have any knowledge of the frequency? Because it seems to me that this is a growing concern. Every week on this show, we have issues of workplace discrimination to discuss, where Christians have been essentially persecuted for their faith. I know in the report there is an example of an NHS chaplaincy, so a hospital chaplain who has received a formal complaint for using the words "God bless." I mean, if you can't expect a chaplain to say "God bless," who can you? So do we have any evidence of the frequency or the increase in this kind of discrimination?
Well, certainly anecdotally, there's lots of evidence to draw on. As you say, you use that quite farcical case of a person in a hospital facing disciplinary action for saying "God bless." There are particular problems in the NHS, it seems, with a sort of pathological closing down of chaplaincy services. In some places, we heard from people who work shifts and 0 hours contracts who find it hard to get work because they can't commit to working on a Sunday, for example. So there's a big body of anecdotal evidence out there. And part of the reason why we want this inquiry in Parliament to take freedom of religion seriously is to use some of the time and the parliamentary resources they've got to actually do a deep dive into this and come up with some more sort of empirical evidence on the problem and some recommendations to government.
Very good. Well, thank you for all of your work in this, James. That was James Somerville-Michael, Deputy Director of the Catholic Union. Thank you for your time today. I want to see what my panel make of this. That NHS chaplaincy example is just one of many, Connor. It seems to me the words God bless are terrifying to certain demographics these days.
Yeah, we've heard on this show many times, Calvin, you've been brilliant at platforming, school chaplains and teachers who have been subjected to mandatory diversity, equity and inclusion training, read exclusion, identity communism training instead, that is incompatible with Christianity. And so by the very nature of this being mandatory, if you speak up about your Christian beliefs, it becomes a new inquisition to actually root out Christians from the workplace. My scepticism about this is whether or not it will go anywhere, both because it would be chaired by Harriet Harman, who has had allegiances with some very questionable campaign groups in the past who have used gay acceptance as a Trojan horse, and also the Equality Act legislation itself. It tries to create a hierarchy, or legislate according to a hierarchy. It tries to reconcile a bunch of incommensurate, incompatible beliefs and identities, because it tries to say that Christianity and Islam, for example, should have the same workplace protections. Even if you voice both faiths in the workplace, disagreement could be considered discrimination. So it's going to be impossible to do this under an Equality Act rubric, and it will be arbitrarily applied against Christians because Christianity has been precluded from public life and stigmatised because it is the only bulwark against diversity, equity and inclusion.
This whole coexist thing gets on my nerves. I went on holiday recently, obviously, and at the airport I went to the chapel, and it said a multi-faith prayer room instead of a chapel, actually. In a Christian country, you'd expect a Christian chapel, but it was multi-faith prayer room. I walked inside. There was no cross, there was no menorah, there were just mats and sandals. Now, the room had obviously been taken over by one particular religion, and other religions would feel uncomfortable in that environment. But it comes to the point of what that you were saying, that once you get rid of protecting one faith, it becomes about all faiths.
Yeah, this is the lie of neutral institutions. No institution is neutral. It's always staffed by people. It's either staffed by those of your friends who agree with what kind of country you want, or frankly, your enemies who slowly wish to push it out over time. And unfortunately, our enemies who would like to advance an identity communist agenda find that any religion that isn't Christianity is very advantageous to have in public life.
Is that the case, Dennis?
I'm not sure. I appreciated James' comments. I did read his report and I did look for evidence. I thought of it myself as an MP who sat on that kind of committee. And actually, it's not for MPs to find evidence. It's for people to bring evidence, really tabulated evidence, to every constituency surgery and say, this is what's happening down the road in our constituency, Mr. or Miss MP. And then I'm sure Harriet, she'll retire at the next election, would take it up. The thing that's the two tiny points, Calvin. One is source for goose, source for gander. If you're going to do this just for Christians, then other religions, all of which believe passionately in, we're not going to go into details about women's rights, a number of issues, will demand exactly equal treatment.
My point is that not all faiths are equal, not all cultures are equal.
Well, OK, that is a different debate if we're going to have a hierarchy of belief. I mean, we used to treat Jews as very differently in the time. The other thing is, I keep thinking of Jesus' injunction, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, render unto God that which is God. I'm not saying workplaces are Caesar, but they're part of the secular life, the non-religious life.
But that wouldn't mean don't be a Christian at work.
Oh, no, of course you can be a Christian at work, but it is for the Christian faith to prove... Absolutely.
In fact, that's a good argument, because render unto Caesar and render unto God. If the Sabbath day, or if the Lord's day, Sunday, is saved for God, and you are a Christian and you want to make sure your Lord's day is protected, that should be protected.
Oh, the Muslims will say the same about Fridays, and Jews will say the same about Fridays. I don't know what other days of the week.
But it's
all at the weekend. It's not a competition, but we have had very serious problems when new faiths arriving in Britain have come and said, we want that right, the same right you're demanding just for Anglicans.
Would we have the same if we went to Saudi Arabia, Dubai, or...
we know that
I don't think we'd...
Israel.
So we have to stop playing this game of everything is equal. Thank you so much to my wonderful duelists tonight, Connor Tomlinson and Dennis McShane. You've both been amazing. And coming up in the final part of my Common Sense Crusade this week, Father Benedict Keeley will be here to tell us about the devastating humanitarian crisis unfolding in Artsakh, an enclave of Azerbaijan.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. One of the biggest humanitarian disasters currently facing the planet is unfolding in the Caucasus region, where 120,000 indigenous Christians, Armenians, are starving in Artsakh, a breakaway state of Azerbaijan. The area is landlocked and is currently subject to an economic blockade by Azerbaijan, leading to horrific suffering and deprivation. Almost the entire population of Artsakh are members of the Armenian Apostolic Church, the world's oldest community of Christian believers. Here to tell me more, I'm joined by Father Benedict Keeley, founder of Nazarene.org, a charity which helps persecuted Christians. Father, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this very serious issue. I haven't heard much about it, and I believe many of my followers haven't either. So if you could start off by giving us a brief synopsis of what's going on, that'd be great.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Calvin, and to GB News, because as you say, it's not being covered by the mainstream media virtually at all. We could discuss reasons why not. Basically, it's very simple. The little enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh as it's called, which is a part now of Azerbaijan, but really is a part of ancient Armenia. Armenia, that ancient Christian country, the first Christian country on earth, 301 became a Christian country 36 years before Constantine was baptized. These Christians are in this area of Azerbaijan, 120,000 men, women, and children, at least 30,000 children. They're being blockaded by Azerbaijan, literally starved to death, literally no food, no medicine, no supplies at all. and the world seems to be diverted by Ukraine, all sorts of other reasons. But this is happening as we speak. Nothing is getting into this country. These people are suffering, and the world seems to have either turned its head away or, for some particular reason, doesn't actually want to deal with this situation.
I do love that nugget of information there, that it was the first Christian community, and of course founded by the apostles. It was, what, Bartholomew and Thaddeus?
Well, it's very useful for when you're doing Trivial Pursuit, Calvin. What's the first Christian country on earth? And people will say all sorts of things, and you say, no, it was Armenia, 301. King Tiridates III, Tiridates the Great, proclaimed that country, Christian country. And interestingly enough, in Azerbaijan, in Nagorno-Karabakh, the Azerbaijanis are destroying Christian cemeteries, Christian structures, 4th, 5th century monasteries. It's one of the things you do when you're ethnically cleansing a country. You deny that the original inhabitants were there. So they're destroying, for example, graveyards. They're destroying the crosses to make out that, oh no, Christians were never here. Well, Christians were there. They've been there for 1,700 years.
Well, there was a similar situation with the Armenian genocide, wasn't there? That people denied that it actually happened. It's amazing how much persecution this region has been through. Father, what can people do to help if they're watching today?
Well, we so often, Calvin, feel there's nothing we can do. We hear horror after horror after horror. I just wrote an article in the European Conservative magazine. It's very easy, actually. We don't have to lose any blood. We don't have to send any troops. Trade. Simple as that. Azerbaijan trades with the European Union. Guess what? It's because we're getting a lot of oil. We're getting a lot of petrol, a lot of gas from Azerbaijan. So surprisingly enough, our politicians are keeping rather quiet about it. We need to rise up and speak to our politicians, our elected representatives, and say, this is happening. What are you doing about it? I've heard the phrase concern. There's been a lot of concern from European politicians. Well, concern didn't save 1.5 million Armenians between 1915 and 1917. At this moment, 120,000 Christians are in danger of death, not just being driven out of their homeland, genocide. So we need to start using trade and aid. It's as simple as that. If we pull the money plug, then something will happen.
Very sound advice. Thank you very much. That's Father Benedict Keeley from Nazarene.org. Thank you for your time today, Father. Now, each week on the show, we like to end with our closing prayer, and tonight I'll be reading the Collect for the 13th Sunday after Trinity. Almighty and merciful God, of whose only gift it cometh that thy faithful people do unto thee true and laudable service, grant, we beseech thee, that we may so faithfully serve thee in this life, that we fail not finally to attain thy heavenly promises. Through the merits of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. You have been watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. I'll be back next Saturday at 7 p.m. Next up, it's Dan Grimes and his Liberal friends. But before that, there's a weather forecast. Thank you once again for tuning in for Series 2. And once again, thank you to Emma Webb for keeping this chair warm. She's now on the beach where I was last week. I hope she's having fun. God bless you all. Deus Vult.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Jonathan Vaughtry, here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Hope you've managed to enjoy Saturday. It will be ending on a relatively fine note for many of us. Some late sunny spells to be had and generally a lot of dry, clear weather into the night as well. We'll allow for some mist and fog patches to develop into the early hours of Sunday morning, though, most extensively for central eastern areas of England. Further towards the north, we've got a band of rain pushing into northern Scotland. Could be heavy at times for the Isle of Lewis and the Northern Isles, but most of us will see our temperatures holding up around 13, 14 degrees Celsius as we start off Sunday morning. So a fairly mild start. Will take a little bit of time for that mist and fog to clear, but eventually it will clear its way off, and many of us will see a good amount of sunshine throughout the day, feeling really pleasantly warm in that highs of 26 degrees Celsius possible across southeastern areas of England. Further to the north, though, that rain will be lingering across the Highlands up into the Northern Isles, so being a much fresher here, and gales around coastal areas for a time as well. High pressure will be hanging on into the start of the new working week. Still, though, with that lingering front across the far north and also the isobars squeezing together across the West Country. So Monday, generally a bit of a breezier day for parts of Devon, Cornwall, definitely some coastal gusts. But elsewhere, winds will be relatively light inland and there'll be